Have you ever looked at the world map and just wondered, why? Why do some countries seem to always be at the center of conflict, while others consistently try to make peace? Well, today we're going to dig into that. We're going to try and crack the hidden code, a nation's identity, that really dictates its moves on the global stage.
The easy answers are always military might or economic power, right? We point to those as the big drivers. But what if that's just scratching the surface? What if the real answer is buried somewhere much deeper, kind of in a nation's collective soul?
Okay, so our journey really starts with this one core idea, that national culture is a kind of collective mental programming. Now, think about that for a second. Imagine every country has its own unique operating system. It's this shared software running in the background for everyone that shapes how that nation sees the world and, of course, how it reacts to it. So if a nation is running on software, you gotta ask, what's in the source code? Let's deconstruct this whole idea of mental programming and see what it's actually made of. Right, so this software isn't written in a day. We're talking centuries of coding. A nation's dominant religion, its unique history, filled with both triumphs and traumas, its language, its social structures, they all play a part. Then you've got the education system, which reinforces the code generation after generation, and its economic philosophy, which shapes the whole thing. All these elements together forge a truly distinct national identity. All right, next up, the political system. This is a massive part of a country's internal blueprint. I mean, how a nation governs itself has a dramatic impact on how it deals with the rest of the world. And the most fundamental split, really, is between open and closed systems. You've got your democracies on one side and dictatorships on the other. An open system, where leaders are actually accountable to the public, is just, well, it's inevitably going to make different foreign policy choices than a closed one, where all the power is in the hands of a few people. And this leads us to a really fascinating idea called the democratic peace theory. The core concept is that while democracies aren't necessarily peaceful all the time, they very rarely, if ever, go to war with each other. It's like their shared programming, being rooted in open debate and public accountability, just fosters this kind of mutual understanding and restraint. But it's not all about political structures. A nation's identity is also built on something a lot less tangible, but wow, is it incredibly powerful. We're talking about the stories it tells about itself. Academics call this a national self-image, and it's so important to remember this has nothing to do with objective reality. It's all about the idealized, shared stories a nation tells itself about its character and its purpose. And this is where it can get really tricky, because when that internal story clashes with what's actually happening in the world, well, that can lead to some major foreign policy blunders. This quote from our source material really just nails the concept. A national self-image is exactly that. It's the story a country tells itself about who it is, what its place in the world is, and what its ultimate mission should be. And that story, it has very real-world consequences. It leads directly to something called a national role conception. Basically, policymakers grow up with this national story, they absorb it, and then they use it to define the commitments, the rules, and the actions that they think are right for their country. And these roles can be really distinct. Does a country see itself as a balancer, always trying to maintain stability, or maybe an aggressor looking to expand its power, or perhaps a defender whose main job is to protect itself and its friends? These aren't just random choices. They flow directly from that national story, that self-image. Let's look at a perfect example: Canada. For a long time, Canada has built this national self-image as a middle power. Not a superpower, but a constructive diplomatic force for good. And what does that lead to? Well, it leads to a foreign policy where it often acts as a mediator, trying to help resolve international conflicts. You see? The story defines the role. Okay, so let's get to the final piece of this whole programming puzzle. This is all about the deep-seated attitudes and beliefs that aren't written down in any law book, but absolutely govern political life. This is what the political scientist Lucian Pye called political culture. It's like the invisible foundation of everything. It's the collection of shared beliefs and attitudes that gives you the unwritten rules of the game, how politics is done, and what's even considered important in the first place. The source material gives us a really powerful example of this. In Israel, the political culture is just profoundly shaped by a focus on national security.
This isn't just some policy preference, it's a deep-seated feeling that gives meaning to the entire political process. And the result is a very concrete action, mandatory military service, which in turn reinforces that exact same culture. So, we've looked at the cultural code, the political systems, the stories nations tell themselves, and the unwritten rules. But what's the big takeaway from all this? Why does understanding it actually matter? Well, here's the key, the bottom line. Next time you see a country make a big move on the world stage, try to look beyond just the immediate external threats or interests. Look at its internal programming. Because understanding a nation's culture, its self-image, and its unwritten rules gives you this incredibly powerful new lens for analyzing why it does what it does. And that leaves us with one final, pretty provocative thought. If a nation's deeply held story about itself is what truly drives its actions, well, what happens when that story is challenged? What happens when a new generation comes along and starts to tell a different story altogether? That, right there, is when things get really, really interesting.